as we said, our guest connect.
It's okay. You can just talk. I think it's good with the conversation that you're having.
Yes, yes. So we're meeting today because of who we are. We want to talk very much about what this year has been like for teachers and for mental health professionals in the schools, for educators in general, and the culmination of a very, very difficult year. So we thank everybody for being here, and we just like to hear some of your observations of the year that you've been through, and and talk about what you think the year might be like next year. And what Laura, you want to add on here?
Yeah, I want to know what some of the surprises were, like what you found surprising, because in talking to, I have a lot of clients who are teachers, and hearing from them, when they came in, a lot of them were like very dismayed at the level that the students were at, that they were, especially little ones coming in and really not understanding a whole heck of a lot. Okay. And then seeing how they progressed and like watching these little ones blossom, and seeing, what it could do to be in a consistently safe environment on a day-to-day basis. That's what I'm just curious from that perspective too, as well. But, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Does anybody have any surprises this year?
Maybe the fact that it ended up being more difficult this year than last year. We weren't really expecting that. I pretty much after being indoctrinated into the position, like at the height of COVID, and coming in as a new president, this year, I expected, we're all going to be back into school, and it won't be as difficult, it won't be as rough. The kids will be in. And it turned out to be a lot more difficult because of the fact that you were really able to see from an academic standpoint, as well as a social emotional standpoint, the impact of what the pandemic had on the students. Because whether we want to admit it or not, and even some of the information that came out about with the science about the COVID pandemic in terms of the transmissibility and the susceptibility of kids to be able to get it. Kids were home. We shut down and they were in the house. So it's not like they were going out. They weren't necessarily being exposed. So we really didn't have an accurate indicator. And this year, as opposed to last year, we saw huge numbers, not just in terms of the adults, coming down with COVID, but then also kids as well. So from a physical health standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, the lack of socialization, which we already know have been impacted by, social media and just, people in general not being able to, have meaningful and, sustained conversations with one another in person. That was exacerbated by the pandemic. And then you turn around and you have little kids who their attention is like, based off of the next, either TikTok video or whatever else it is that they can get onto in the moment. So to be able to grasp their attention and then try to get them back into being learners, where a lot of the questions I came across this year is, how does this impact me in my daily life? How is this even meaningful? And that became very difficult as well. And then just trying to fill in those gaps. So, that was very, I wasn't expecting as much of it in terms of the totality or the cumulative effect of it all. We knew that the kids were going to be behind, but the task that was ahead of us, I don't think any of us could have prepared for it, no less than what transpired the year and a half before.
I must concur. I must concur. We, on the teacher end of it, trying, if you taught, whatever they wanted to call it, but if you had kids in front of you and kids on a computer for a school year, it was horrible. It was horrible. We understood the need, we needed the space, we didn't know, what to expect with everybody back. And so you had, a year and a half of kids who were fully remote, but some were coming every other day. And I think, like Nakia said, they were used to almost hiding behind the screen and being able to be distracted. They were half listening to you, or they shut their cameras off and they were doing other things. And bringing them back in, we were like, we know this is going to be tough, but it's good for them to be together. And this is going to be, the start to the healing. And I felt the kids were like, what? Their behaviors were so different. Like, this is my 22nd year or something like that teaching. And I was like, what's happening? What is this? What are these behaviors that I'd never seen on the high school level? Even on the high school level, it was behaviors, I guess, some of my 9th graders were last in school in 7th grade. And so they were 7th graders behaviorally. And I was like, stop doing that. Like, there were things I was saying to students that were not, to me, age appropriate, but for them, they were still back in middle school. They didn't understand some of the consequences of, high school and not getting this credit. You won't be moved on. Like, just little things where we had been like supporting them and had the, the shelter for them and protecting them. And they didn't have, exams that were going to count against them, and the exams were canceled and there wasn't a regents and it was optional. All of a sudden they were like, what do you mean? You're expecting things from us? Like, they had no understanding of coming back. And so we kept trying to be like, no, this counts. Everything counts. And it was, I think it was just too much for them. It was overwhelming for them. So they acted out, what do you mean this is, gonna count? Give me a do-over? We were all trying to like hold them accountable. And they were like, but you let us have grace for like 2 years. Leave us alone now, I don't want to put my phone away. I used to have it out every day while you were teaching on the screen, so it was just behaviors that were interesting is what I would use on the high school level. And, middle school, elementary, there were definitely a lot of students just not feeling ready to be back, students afraid. And, kids act out in different ways. And so we did see a lot more fighting and lack of, they hadn't been together. So the social aspect. And so we had so much compassion for that. And, we kept just trying to find all year. I feel like school systems were just trying to find the new answer to fix these things we were seeing. And, some districts were able to hire an extra social worker or get another dean or, somebody else that we could try to help the students feel more comfortable.
I'm just curious, were you guys prepared by by the admins? They give you guys training in order to be prepared for this? Because we saw very, very early on, before this occurred, our team was really wanting to go out and help different school districts. And I don't think that they were thinking that it was going to be so bad. And so they were just like, no, we don't need another thing that we need to learn about. Okay. But then we're really like slapped up, just like, bam, like, yeah, we need this like really badly, like right now. But then it's like not available because it's like you're just like running to catch up to put, this Band-Aid on this gaping, wound that's, happening, and not having the understanding, like you're saying, all these behaviors that were coming out, not having the wherewithal. From, I'm sure many teachers struggled with that. You guys are seasoned teachers, so you understand, but all at once, so many children, usually it's maybe, 1 or 2 or whatever. Now you have like, the majority, or I don't know, I'm just making, just saying things, but I'm sure like that was like really, really horrendous in terms of like also dealing with your own stressors. And being able to, now you have to teach, and now not only does it count for the kids, but it counts for you. You know what I mean? And that's intense. That's a really intense year to have to deal with that. And so I'm just curious if there was any support, or like, I'm sure there's support, like bringing in an extra social worker. Okay, that might be helpful, but it's not really helping everybody understand what's happening here.
Absolutely.
So I think that was the missed, for me, that was the missed opportunity, but I don't know what you guys think. What do you think?
I agree. I think the idea of getting back to normal was so exciting. Whether or not we were going to be in masks or, masks were going to be optional at some point, which they became, that if we knew it still wasn't normal, you still had that argument happening on the outside and the political pressures of everything. But in terms of, you know, having a full classroom back, you were like, oh, things are going to be better. Things are going to be normal. We know the kids need some of our help, but yeah, I don't think anybody anticipated what we got. And there was a lot of, let's, you know, SEL the students, and I kept saying, but the teachers need SEL. Like we don't know what to do for them, and you know, there aren't enough. You know, I feel like my building personally, you know, we have 4 psychologists, 1 per grade. We have 2 social workers, not enough. You know, we have guidance counselors, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for the close to 2,000 kids when a lot of them were struggling more than normal. And the teachers were trying to be a stopgap and direct kids to get help. But the teachers needed help. They were struggling with their own things coming out, you know, from COVID, some of the same losses that students had and hadn't properly dealt with. So we were all like in the same boat, but of course, you know, we're all there to help the students. So although everyone were like, you know, you guys are heroes, you're great, it was almost like words for a lot of the teachers. And Nakia knows as a union president, you're like trying to go everywhere and, you know, like you said, put band-aids on to support your staff, but, you know, everybody's focused on student wellness, and staff wellness wasn't at 100% trying to start the school year. And as the year went on, you kind of felt that. You felt, you know, the lack of energy. People were just like, my morale, like, I just can't, you know, I heard a lot of that. I just don't know what to do. I can't do this anymore. And
are they making any plans for, you know, based on this? I mean, you're obviously so aware of it, and the 2 of you are so aware of it as teachers, but because this went on, are they making any plans, or is there any like anything going on during the summer for you? Any programs like before school starts again next year to help with all of this, or is it just you're just supposed to deal with it and wait for it to get better?
Yeah, I think that it really depends on your district and what resources you have. I mean, when we came back to school, we had already gone through or started with a brand new administration. I mean, we're relatively transient on that end, which is another piece that we'll just put to the side. But you know, just in terms of talking about what was happening, you know, in a situation with my district, you know, when we started our curriculum advisory council committees, where it is that we took a look at some of the various aspects from academic levels, from diversity, equity, and inclusion to SEL and those type of things. So I think that we did I guess, a yeoman's job, I would say, of putting together certain committees that were going to address some of the obstacles from an academic standpoint, from a social emotional standpoint. The challenge is that while we were engaged in these programs, we were engaged in these programs as everything was unfolding during the course of the school year. So it's not like we had pre-planning or we were addressing these things or received any of those trainings or support prior to, because no one knew. Again, like Cordelia said, everyone was just excited about, you know, the kids coming back in full force. I think that for a lot of school districts, it really depends on how proactive it is that you were going into this year. A lot of school districts might be a little better off next year based off of some of the work that they've done this year. But I will echo what it is that Cordelia said in terms of teachers are burned out. I mean, you heard a lot where teachers were being called heroes because parents had to stay home with their kids. But as soon as those kids came back into school, that hero thing just, for the most part, just kind of went out the window. And it was just like, you deal with it. And there was a piece that was missing, which is, education and school is all about the kids, but it can't be 100% all about them if we're the ones who are in front of them. So if we're not okay, how can they be? And that's always the missing component whenever it is that we're talking about education. We're just expected to just move on from whatever else that's going on with, what's happening with us in and out of the school setting. So to your point, we are getting some resources, but a lot of those resources were happening as we were going through the process. So this year we really wouldn't be able to say that we received everything that was going to equip us to handle this year. Maybe next year will be better with what has been put in place. I mean, at least for my district and with Hope.
So I just wanted to pop in for a second. As Lori said before, this is what we found was our challenge when the pandemic started. We knew that teachers were going to need this support. And we always said, you know, that SEL is not just for the kids. We always said that. This was our one of our slogans as we organized ourselves. And I wonder for you folks as teachers on the ground there, we found the teachers resistant, and understandably in the beginning, because it was just another thing they'd have to attend, another, you know, professional development class they'd have to attend for their own, you know, mental health. We don't have time for that. They said, we don't have time. We need to deal with what is right now. But so are you saying that now teachers are recognizing, I do need support, I need help? And I'm wondering, what specifically have teachers told you that they absolutely could benefit from now at this point? You know, we've always heard in the past, it's as a high school teacher, it's less preps, for example. But now things are so different. It's not even just a question. Of course, less preps is wonderful. But what do you specifically think that teachers could benefit from now and are open to at this time in terms of help for their own SEL?
Well, what would you need to know in order to feel like you would be able to deal with the situation?
Yes, exactly.
Like dealing with the behaviors, you know, what would be helpful, I think, for you guys, you know, to understand better?
Well, I guess a lot of consistency in communication. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of information that obviously is confidential, but there's information that the social workers have, that the guidance counselors have, that the psychologists have. You know, having that type of conversation and being aware, instead of doing our typical teacher investigative reporting, which doesn't manifest itself into a kid slams a chair into a wall because they're having a breakdown. Having those types of outlets, or having those type of articulations where it is that you can get together and say, hey, listen, we can't really get into detail right now, but you know, these are some of the things that are problems or issues with such and such students who are on your rosters, and just us being aware of what's coming into our classrooms so that we can be better equipped to handle it when the time comes. And you know, I think that what education attempts to do in an attempt to not, I guess, tip the apple cart where it is that putting too much onto our plate, is that they make things limited in terms of professional development to certain groups and certain categories. But when it comes to the social emotional part and dealing with students, teachers need to be able to have access to a lot more of those strategies that our social workers and guidance counselors and psychologists or, you know, those type of trainings that they are being exposed to, because we all know that we wear many hats. And of course, we are limited in certain aspects for what we can do in that arena, but we could definitely be more of a help to each other, understanding that the world that we're living in education is so much different in terms of what the needs are of the students. So teachers really want to be more informed of what is coming into their classrooms. And they also want some consistency in the form of support. We need the support of our administrators when it is that we're dealing with certain things that come with kids and families, because if we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, which is make sure that we are addressing those needs so that they aren't a hindrance to academic progress, how can we do that if we are not all on the same page? So our staff members are really talking about, you know, we want to have meaningful professional development, not something just to satisfy our contractual hours. And if these are the things that are most important with what it is that our kids are struggling with, then those are the type of things that it is that we need to be part of in the classroom, and it can't just be curricula.
Yeah, absolutely. They tried. I have to say my district tried. There was this program called the Ruler program, and they tried to implement that through this, but it wasn't, and they presented it to the whole staff, not just teachers, everyone. And then you were asked to try some things with students, check in. They had to, basically respond to you to certain questions. How are you feeling right now? Like these basic things. And the problem was for teachers, and like you said, Lori, it felt like something else to do, because you weren't telling me that I could give less tests. You weren't telling me to reduce the number of assessments so there's minutes available where then I can discuss that there's a kid in the blue section who's telling me they're very unhappy and have no energy. I was then just kind of going, okay, well, I see that some of you are upset today and we have resources available. Okay, the cell isn't like, I didn't have the time available. So the part of education didn't change where you were telling me I needed to check in on the kids more, find time to do this, but all my other expectations were there. And you were still also saying, and remediate the kids because they're behind. So where was this SEL? You were telling me I needed to do it, and I saw the little training video, and it was optional to do more after school, and nobody was going. Nobody was gonna do the more thing because the plate was already full, and now we saw the kids struggling, but you were adding more things on the plate, and you didn't take anything off. It was just like, you're still expected to do this. There's still got to be there's going to be a Regents in June. The kids, there was nothing taken off of the plate so that we could say, you know what, I can spend 10 minutes really checking in on these kids. Because then teachers started saying, in the frustration, well, I'm not a social worker. What do you want me to do? I'm here teaching, AP biology or whatever. It was not. I understood that we all needed to get to a certain point and, encouraging teachers to do it as well. But I felt the frustration they were feeling with, what did you take away from me? There's still a third grade ELA exam I have to give. So when do I stop to really address this and have those, SEL conversations in my morning meeting if my expectation is that these kids still have to do well on these math, state exams. So it was very frustrating trying to add more onto the plate and to be expected to, go after school or come early to, get this extra stuff. And it wasn't balancing. We didn't feel it was a balanced rollout of some of the things, well-meaning things, but they just weren't balanced.
Yeah,
Well, that's the thing is that there's no more time left. We chalk up the whole day as much as they can. They have 8, 9 periods, 10 in some schools. And, those are to the brim, the bell rings and the kids are out the door. There's no time to it's not even just like the scheduling you were talking about where it's over the whole year and you're still having to meet all these benchmarks. But additionally, just the day to day, there is no when is a time where, okay, the teachers all get together and let's talk about, how each, kid is doing. Every single type of professional development course that you talk about, any kind of extra training or thing that's supposed to help a teacher is an after school program that no one wants to do because you're there already for 9-something hours, not including your commute. And so it takes up an insane amount of your day. That doesn't even include, again, the homework you're doing, right? So there is no time left other than taking it back a little bit from just courses. I mean, what Nakia was talking about was absolutely on the point where, they need to actually meet with psychologists and therapists and not okay, so now we have all this data on this kid has this thing and this, because you want to talk about teachers don't want to be social workers and then you're giving them ammunition on what kid has what. You got to not just throw that on a piece of paper. And of course, Nakia wasn't suggesting that. He was suggesting literally meeting with these people and having an individual conversation, learning each kid. That takes time. That's not maybe you rework the day a bit. So maybe there's a day before school starts, or maybe a week there's before school starts where teachers are paid, not pro bono. No, you get some credit. You're paid to meet, and this is a whole week-long period where there's a learning about each kid that you're gonna have for the entire year. I think if you're going to meet them for like 9 months, I think a week is an adequate amount of time to just at least understand what the teacher's about to get into, right? Because ultimately the teacher is a social worker. If they're going to be with them for an hour a day and they're going to be rotating kids like multiple times for an hour a day. So yeah, it's really about, there needs to be time left. And this is why like working through like we'll get you some credit here, we'll do an additional program here, it'll never work, because teachers, like everybody said, they're already burnt out. So actually radically changing how we even conduct the school day in terms of scheduling kids, in terms of how they meet with their social workers. Maybe it shouldn't just be like a once every other year kind of thing. I mean, I know kids that are able to like defer it and just basically never meet with a social worker, you know, or like the high turnover rate to where like they've had 3 different ones, maybe 2 different in the same year. And so it's really just a matter of actually staying consistent, actually like radically changing the day so that there is like a time to breathe. Because right now we are just going to the bell every single minute that we can.
Yeah, you know what I think, but I think unfortunately, you know, what you're saying is almost like, Jake, like it's like what I see is like the fantasy school, you know, where they, you know, they get or a very small private progressive school, right, where you get to meet with the teachers every Friday and talk about your students together, and they have all kinds of activities that help SEL throughout the year, and everybody, I mean, what's unfortunate is what I'm hearing, you know, as a retired teacher, is that the whole thing needs to be holistic. You know, you can't have, like you said, you can't have this little SEL thing in your morning meeting, and while you're having the morning meeting, you're worried about the ELA prep that you have to do for these little kids, you know, for an hour. And if you're going to do that, how are you going to do your literature, you know, piece, or your writing piece, or whatever else you wanted to do that day? It almost, I mean, in order for it to work, I feel it's got to be holistic. I mean, things have to change, and I unfortunately don't see them changing in that direction. If anything, I see them in the other direction, where the administrators, you know, from the top down, it's all about, well, they're not doing well, more work, more academics, more of that, right? Instead of why aren't they doing well? What else is going on in their heads, and how is that affecting the whole teaching staff? What can we do to change this? You know, it's sad to me.
And we're not even, and what you're talking about, Rox, I mean, it's so true, but we're not even discussing what's happening in the rest of the country. Okay. And so that, like, we're talking about New York schools, and we're not even experiencing, I don't know what you guys are, maybe you guys are experiencing some of that, but we're not even experiencing what some of these other states in the country is experiencing, what's coming, when it feels like it's coming, it feels like it's moving. And I think in the next 2 years, there's going to be a huge shift, and we're going to start to see it. I don't know. It's very scary, on top of all this that you guys have to deal with, which is so intense. It's so important. But yes, we need to change. Jake, you're absolutely right. We need to make changes in the way that we teach and the time that we spend. Imagine if you had this year to really work with your students and actually come in and be with them and be like, hey, what's going on? Not have to really worry. Know that there was like stuff that you had to get through, but to really say, okay, let's assess each kid and see where they're at. And so let's figure out what everybody needs. How are we going to get them back on point? And watch how they would have thrived like beyond. Okay, because the tension and the stress wouldn't have been there for you or for them. And I mean, it could have been an incredibly, remarkably productive year. Instead, you guys were thrown with, like, you know, so much. Oh, I can't.
I think
Sorry.
I think that there should have been nationally, somebody said something about a do-over. There should have been nationally a do-over year in every school, that everyone did the last grade over again, whether you were a 9th grader in high school or a 2nd grader. And within that space, there could have been more focus also on the social and emotional learning. But everyone, you know, I know teachers in my community who, you know, are teaching in elementary school, and they're supposed to be teaching division this year, but the kids didn't learn multiplication last year. I mean, everything should have been stopped. And this year should have been a year that to make up for what was lost last year in terms of academics, but also to build a support system, you know, to really acknowledge the social and emotional toll that this had taken on children and teachers and families. And that was you know, of course, you know, it's pie in the sky, but it could, I think that kind of radical approach after the pandemic would have given us tremendous opportunity. But since that didn't happen, I think the goals of that we have to try to meet those in other ways now. Some, you know, like I've seen, like in New York, okay, so they lowered the passing grade for the regions, they're not doing this, but it was those expectations that teachers have to meet, the academic expectations. If those are not changed, then everything else can't change because teachers are still being held to that.
Absolutely.
Well, there's this paranoia that like if you remotely take any kind of content away from like the curricula, which is a very vague thing to say the least, there's this perception that, oh, you've lowered standards. My kid's going to be dumber than any other kid ever. How dare you? And then that goes through every administrator's head. And they're like, I don't want to have to deal with that, and I'm probably gonna get canned if that happens, right? But again, this is under the perception that like there are kids that are absorbing every single thing. And I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are plenty of kids that do absorb every single thing, and God bless them. But like that's not the case at all. I mean, we've seen, you know, they've had to lower standards just to like give this perception that, oh, but we have more kids passing.
Right.
Right.
I would call it expectations, the benchmarks. We don't have to necessarily lower standards, but let's take into account that no one's been in school for a year.
Right. Well, I don't think we even need to lower standards. I think it's just the amount of content.
Right.
Right. There's this like, okay, you're going to learn this entire thing, whether it's history, whether it's like you're going to teach 6 books, 200-page books in a year or something like that. Like, you know, I can read that, but like 90% of kids are just like, God, I'll just like skim it or like look it up. It's so easy to look it up on the internet now. Like, there's no way. I mean, I'm in college. There is no way that a teacher can create a test that is like immune to like people just using the basic tools around them to get the answers they need, right? And to try to create questions or try to test out of that, you're just basically spiting kids. It's not teaching anything, it's you're spiting kids. And so it needs to get rid of this focus of testing this. It's almost like an ego of just like, oh, you didn't actually learn that, you know. And so yeah, it's baffling to say the least. I think that the focus is so wrong. Sorry,
a lot that we don't address, and this group has addressed a lot, is trauma. If as a teacher, if I had never learned anything about trauma, I wouldn't know what to do with SEL. It's not okay to just hand a teacher a program and say, here, do this, and not understand what the underlying cause is here. And when Cordelia was talking about fights in the classroom and things like that, it makes me wonder what has gone on, what's going on in these kids' heads when you're holding them to this standard and they've missed 1.5 years of school. How does that make them feel? Like what's going, you know what I mean? Like that's a trigger. What are the triggers? You know, it goes back to what Nakia was saying too. What went on in the home in this time? Because these kids, 6th, 7th, 8th, 3rd, 4th grade, whatever, they just didn't show up. We know what their history is for some of them. What went on in that 1.5 years that they were home? What went on? Did they lose a family member, a parent, something like that? We address none of that. We roll out assessments, we give them tests, and we want to hold them to the standard that, you know, we think that they should be at 8th graders or 3rd graders, when in reality, what we're doing is triggering whatever they're feeling about themselves, that they're not good enough, they're not smart enough, that, you know, they're deficient in some kind of way, or whatever has acknowledged at all, whatever has gone on in the home for the past year and a half, on top of, under normal circumstances, what was going on before that.
Right.
So to look at trauma as a root of why are our kids behaving this way? Why can't they learn? Why, what specific kind of social emotional? It's all well and good to get them to fill out a chart with a smiley face or a frowny face. But why? Why the frowny face? Where did it come from? What's going on? There's more, there's so much more and deeper that we don't acknowledge. And I think as teachers, we need to understand that. We learn academically what we're supposed to teach. Nakia is right. It's a game changer when you understand where these kids are coming from. And I don't think that was addressed or acknowledged at all. At all. If you have a year's worth of school and you're coming in and somebody is saying to you, you're going to read Shakespeare this week, I'd throw a chair too. I would, it's like, it's a lot. But we don't look at that,
It's true. Add on special ed students who may not have gotten classified because for 2 years they were fully remote. So now they're struggling through, and they probably would have been identified 2 years ago. Add on the ENL students who, I teach ENL collaborative living environment. They're going to take the same regents as all my other students. Let's be realistic, right? Add on all of the other things. And like Nakia said, I don't know on any record on my roster who lost a grandparent, who lost an aunt, uncle, and I'm teaching about cancer and viruses in my science class, and I don't know who I'm triggering. And so obviously, how do I know why that kid is like, I just need to get out of your room now? They're frustrated. They don't want to sit and listen because I could be triggering them unknowingly. So that communication piece, between the home, my superintendent loves to say, we're all a family, we chuckle at him sometimes, but he's trying, right? Because the home scenario, whatever that may be, and, wherever those parents are, and the school, and what the kids are doing, I feel like we're chasing our tail. I feel like we're not making the proper connections. Parents don't trust what the school's teaching their kids. They're absolutely questioning teachers, indoctrinating their kids. There's this whole cycle, and the lack of respect from going, like Nakia said, from heroes one year and, parades for us and whatnot to what are you teaching my child? Open up your curriculum. You're trying to make them into diverse learners. I don't know what whatever we're being accused of.
God forbid.
Right. And the kids are in the same house, oh, my father says you're not, teachers are doing this to us. And I'm like, wow, okay. So it's this weird cycle right now. And I don't know how we get off the train. Like you said, I don't know when things are going to get normal. People keep saying, next year will be a normal year, and I'm like, you're jinxing us. Stop, be quiet.
I think it's hard to even think about the concept of normalcy. What the pandemic has done was that it made people forget. And what it made people forget is where we were before the pandemic. Remember, Regents' requirements were already lowered before the pandemic even happened. So there was already an issue with public education. And now what it is that we're doing is that we're adding all of these other elements where we hadn't even addressed what was happening before then. And to go to the point that many on the panel were making today, APPR didn't even count for teachers this year. And again, conversations that I had with last year and this year. Last year, we didn't take advantage of the opportunity of smaller class sizes to try to fill in those gaps before we came back in. This year, APPR didn't count. So instead of forging forward and doing exactly what we did last year without all of the kids, now we have all of the kids, we didn't take those opportunities to fill in the gaps. There's the problem that it is that we have with public education, and going back and even touching upon what Lori said in terms of what's happening in the rest of the state, it is all connected in a sense of there is a hypocrisy there, and then there's also a failure to acknowledge that we haven't really made any progress in regards to education. Forget about just filling in the pandemic gaps. What about all the problems that happened before that? And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we're already moving further back than where we were when we entered into the pandemic. So again, that pendulum is gone. We're now starting a new origin point where some of the faces that it is that I see right now, based off of where it is that we're going as a society, may not even be present in an educational setting or work setting. I mean, the suffrage movement is almost about to be wiped out. Forget about, civil rights as a whole. So how are we going to address all of these issues? You want to talk about bringing race into the classroom? You want to talk about dealing with some of the traumas? What about some of the traumas some of our colleagues are facing by the simple fact of you now have professionals who can't even make choices about what it is that they're going to do? How is that going to impact our students, our female students, who we want to get into science and we want them to get into math, and but now we're turning back the clocks in terms of, bless you, what if they can't get there because of anything that might happen along their lifespan that might upset that, and their opportunities might be dwindled because of the fact of their choices are limited in terms of what they can do with their own bodies. So, I mean, it is, holding the world up, like Atlas. I really don't know where it is that we come from and how we get to a point where it is that we can address all of these different things, when every time you turn around to try to come up with a solution, we want you to do this, and this is going to be good for the kids. But again, going back to what it is that Jacob highlighted and Cordelia, where is the time? We didn't have time before. We need to do more now. Where's the time?
Nakia, may I?
Go ahead.
Oh, Carol, I just want to ask one thing. Nakia and Cordelia, as union presidents, Teachers Association presidents, where are you in terms of your conversations with superintendents and principals on these exact issues you're talking about? Do you go to them with members of your union and say, this is untenable? This is untenable, this situation. It is not acceptable. Our teachers are leaving because of these conditions. And I feel like we're back in the 19th century, the labor movement, saying that, we're going to reform this today. This is not something, but that was through politics. We had President, with all of his stuff, Teddy Roosevelt, foreign policy, I'm not aligned with, but in terms of reform at home and in terms of reform of government, we need. So where are you in terms of leadership? How do they receive you when you go and say, and have you gone and say, these conditions are untenable? The fact that we have not addressed, like you've said, what teachers want is to be more informed. What teachers need is consistent admin support. What teachers need is meaningful professional development. How is that going for you in addressing that with admins as union presidents?
Right. Well, I'll take it a couple of different ways. A lot of the conversation has been well received. We even had kind of like a district summit where it is that the board members, central administration, the presidents of all of the associations, where we came and we talked about what are some of our needs. And our needs were, we talked about the support that it is that we needed, the consistency that it is that we needed, that was going to be able to support, be linked with that support. How teachers are burned out and things haven't been addressed. And they are listening. However, those actions, listening and then putting those things into action are two totally different things. So having those conversations, yes, they're being had, and yes, there is some receptiveness to it. But I think that all of us who are here and we're coming up with a lot of these ideas, whether we want to admit that the education or that a school district is a business, it is. And the business of school, its results. And as much as they're going to want to say, okay, you know, we will try to give you or try to provide for you what it is that you need. Some districts do it better than others. At the end of the day, the students have to do well. And if there's going to be something that is going to impact that, that is going to always take a back seat.
Well, Nakia, the do wells and heavy quotes, and I know what you mean by that, but like, yeah, what I mean,
What
in
is
terms of
doing
it being
well?
well, I mean, the thing is that it's this perception that the kids are like absorbing all the content if the grades are high. And so like the corporate like takeover will like absolutely come as a result of this obsession with, well, if my kid can click through all the buttons and then like the number is high, he learned a lot. And so
yeah, you don't want to be the district at the bottom of the Newsday list.
Yep.
Because nobody wants to move there. And your school, I'm just telling you what happens is that if your school district is not on that list, Newsday prints it every year, then nobody's going to move to your district if your district's education system is bad. And then. So there's this like constant thing of where they know what we're saying. Like Nakia said, they've had the meetings in the town halls and they've met with us and they've heard us and they've implemented some things. They've really, you know, taken the step to, you know, you need some more discipline and we'll hire another dean, you know, like they'll try, but that's not fixing the fact that I have 28 kids and it would be better if my class was 20. There's a teacher shortage, right? There's some things, you know, they have money now because we had some federal funds from COVID. And so they were able to do a couple more things. But when that money runs out, you know, in the next year or so, we're going to go back to the pre-pandemic or pre-COVID funds start. So it's this constant comparison thing that we have. And you're right, it's a perfect opportunity, a ripe opportunity for, you know, all of the charter school people to be like, well, come over here. You know, we're doing it better over here. Well, yeah, you have 15 cap class sizes, you know, it's different.
And also the textbook companies, that's the biggest thing, is that like, it's not just like, and that's why I keep focusing on this like warped perception of the content of the classes, where it's like you mentioned, Cordelia, they're like, open up your curriculum or whatever. It's like, okay, are you asking McGraw-Hill to do that? Are you asking Pearson to do that? Because a lot of teachers, even if they do open up your curriculum, it's just going to be that. It's with so much of COVID, it was like, okay, here's your online module. And a lot of teachers were like, hands in the air. Okay. I'm not saying that that's a lot of them, but like a lot of them had no choice. Right? That was like a forced thing because of budgeting also. But, you know, this like warped perception that we know what's in those courses. And if we come down hard on those teachers, then they'll change it to be better. Or like, if we have the same standards or even harder standards than the previous year, then our kids will like learn more. I mean, you know, what I do fear is, again, like, you know, there's going to be this fight, and then eventually they're going to pick the easy route, which is the infrastructure that already exists, which is all these online modules that the school is getting subsidized to buy. Because again, these are taxpayer dollars going to the right. It's not like, oh, well, there's like a profit thing. And these textbook companies are just getting funneled taxpayer dollars to basically give you these online modules that give your kids check marks without teaching them anything. Where, you know, you have like this fear of teachers where they're like, oh, well, we got to create tests that can be immune to any kind of like kid like cheating online or something like that. And then like, okay, well, it's going to be even worse when McGraw-Hill is just like, yeah, here's your online module you do at home, or, you know, in a classroom on an iPad or whatever. And you're telling me the kid can't open up another tab and just, you know, look it up or whatever. And that doesn't mean that like that's bad or anything. It's good that kids can just like look up things. Maybe we should just judge the quality of a kid's education by their ability to regurgitate like basic quips and facts, right? And so that is a radical shift in how we perceive knowledge and the education of a child, as opposed to the ability to, you know, in a small span of time, chunk a bunch of knowledge in their head and then fill out a regents. And then that is a determinant for how intelligent that kid is. It's just not adequate.
So, you know, we feel like there's a mandate here. There's a mandate for change. We have been saying this all along. This is what attentive teaching is all about. What everyone here on this panel is about is is revolutionary change, so that teachers are heard. Exactly what Cordelia said resonated with me, and I'm sure everyone here on this panel. Take something off the plate so that we can address the things that are vitally important for us to do. Don't keep piling on the plate. Take a little something off so we can spend the time to know and love our students, to give them what they need, and to give ourselves what we need so we can be better educators and have sane classrooms that address what everyone needs to have healthy learning. With so much more to discuss, and with our summer approaching, we are not diminishing the importance of all of this. We want to just take a moment and wish every teacher and everyone on our panel a restorative summer, a restorative time, and a time of reflection to think about how this year can be different. And we continue the struggle. We have our union presidents here and others throughout the country to work with admins to bring what teachers need and what students need. And we want to thank you all so much for being here today, and hope you'll join us again. There's so much more to talk about. And if I might say one more thing before we leave, I've often found as a teacher in the classroom that when change could not come from the outside, I needed to make it on the inside. I needed to do things in my classroom that if I felt I didn't have time for it, I'm going to have time for it. That's it. That's it. And we need to do, until that change comes from the outside, that extrinsic, that extra change that we need. And it's emotional for me to say this because it doesn't happen the way we need it from the outside, at least in the pace we need it at. We need to make our room. We need to be that change that we want to see. We have to be Gandhi in our room, because we can affect, if we're in high school, our 120 kids a day. They will remember that in Ms. Anthony's room, it was different. In Mr. Wolfe's room, it was different. And then hoping for that, that outside change will come, but we need to make it from the inside. And on that note, I wish everybody a good summer. And thank you for being with us.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
See you soon. Thank you so much.